wishing you a lucky start to the week. You hear the cry before you're fully awake. Small, urgent, impossible to ignore. You pull the child close. Your heartbeat slows them. Your warmth steadies them. And in that moment, something ancient and automatic moves through you. An instinct so old it predates language, fire, and every civilization that has ever existed. For roughly 300,000 years, this is how it started. Not with parenting books, not with pediatricians or sleep schedules or debates about screen time. Just a parent, a child, and a body that already knew what to do. How your ancestors raised children is one of the most surprising stories in all of human history. Because what they did, intuitively, without instruction, turns out to be far more sophisticated, far more communal, and far more effective than almost anything modern culture has invented to replace it. Start with the first hours of life. Birth in the ancient world was dangerous. Maternal and infant mortality were real and present threats. But your ancestors did not face birth alone. Anthropologist Wanda Treva of New Mexico State University has spent decades studying the evolution of human birth and argues that assisted birth, one human helping another through labor and delivery, is one of the oldest and most universal behaviors in our species. The human infant's head is extraordinarily large relative to the birth canal. This mismatch, the result of millions of years of brain expansion, meant that birth required help almost from the beginning. Your ancestors evolved not just to give birth, but to give birth together. The infant that arrived was unlike the young of almost any other species. A newborn foal can stand within hours. A newborn chimp clings to its mother with powerful grip strength. But a human newborn is almost completely helpless, unable to walk, unable to regulate its own temperature, unable to feed itself. Developmental biologist David Geary of the University of Missouri has called the human infant the most neurologically immature of any primate at birth, essentially born a year too early, because any later and the head would be too large to pass through the birth canal at all. This radical helplessness had a radical consequence. It meant that no single parent could raise a human child alone. The demands were simply too great. A mother who spent every waking hour holding, nursing, and protecting an infant could not also forage enough food to sustain herself. The math did not work. And so your ancestors developed a solution that has been largely dismantled in modern life: cooperative breeding. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy of the University of California, Davis, has spent decades building the case for what she calls the alloparent, from the Greek word for other, meaning any individual who is not the biological parent, but who helps raise the child. Among hunter-gatherer societies studied by Hrdy and her colleagues, the alloparent network was extensive. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, unrelated adults in the band who simply participated in the raising of children because the group's survival depended on it. The grandmother hypothesis, first formally proposed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes of the University of Utah, argues that the post-reproductive lifespan of human females, unique among primates, evolved precisely because grandmothers were so valuable to child survival. A grandmother who stopped reproducing and redirected her energy toward feeding and protecting her grandchildren dramatically increased those grandchildren's chances of survival. Human longevity, on this view, is not an accident. It is a feature. Your grandmother's presence in your life is not a coincidence. It is the result of millions of years of selection pressure that recognized her value. This is what childhood looked like. Not a single parent in a private home. A web of caregivers, biological and otherwise, holding, carrying, feeding, teaching, and watching over a child who belonged, in a real sense, to the whole group. Let's reconstruct a day. You are somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, roughly 50,000 years ago. Your child is 2 years old, still nursing, still being carried much of the time, but beginning to walk, beginning to reach for the world. In the morning, your band moves. You carry your child on your hip or your back, their body against yours, their breathing matching yours. Research by developmental psychologist James McKenna of the University of Notre Dame has shown that the physiological synchrony between a carried infant and its caregiver, matched breathing, shared warmth, coordinated arousal, has profound regulatory effects on the infant's developing nervous system. Being carried was not a comfort. It was a developmental environment. By midday, the camp has settled near water. Your child is on the ground now, in the center of the group, watched by 3 or 4 different adults simultaneously. They are not in a separate space designated for children. They are in the middle of adult life, watching, listening, imitating. This is how learning happened. Not in classrooms, not through instruction, through what developmental psychologists now call intent community participation. The child is present at adult activities, observing, occasionally helping, gradually taking on more responsibility as their competence grows. David Geary, an anthropologist at Utah State University who has studied childhood across cultures for decades, documents how hunter-gatherer children were almost never formally taught skills. Instead, they watched, practiced in play, and were gradually incorporated into real work when they were ready. Play itself was the curriculum. Unstructured, mixed-age, largely unsupervised play that took place in the safety of the band's wider, watchful presence. Children played at hunting, at building shelter, at caring for younger children. They were not rehearsing abstract skills. They were rehearsing specific adult roles in specific environments. The play was the education. Discipline looked nothing like what most modern parents practice. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer child rearing have noted, with consistent surprise, how rarely children are punished or commanded. Jean Liedloff, who lived among the Yaquana people of Venezuela and documented her observations in her influential work on the continuum concept, noted that Yaquana adults almost never issued direct instructions to children and almost never punished them. Yet the children were cooperative, competent, and socially integrated in ways that stunned outside observers. The mechanism was not command and compliance. It was immersion and imitation. Children were expected to eventually do what adults did because they lived so fully inside adult life that doing otherwise barely occurred to them. Weaning happened later than in most modern cultures. Among the Kongsan people of the Kalahari, studied extensively by anthropologist Melvin Konner and his colleagues, breastfeeding continued for 2 to 4 years, with nursing on demand throughout the day and night. Carrying was constant for the first year or two. Co-sleeping, the parent and child sleeping in physical contact, was universal. There was no such thing as putting a child down to sleep alone. The infant's nervous system was not designed for solitary sleep. It was designed for a warm body, a heartbeat, and the smell of someone who would respond if anything went wrong. Now consider what modern culture has done. It has moved the child out of the center of adult life and into a separate, age-segregated space called school. It has replaced the alloparent network with a nuclear family that often consists of 2 parents, or one, trying to do what an entire band once did together. It has enforced solitary sleep from birth, eliminated carrying, and pushed weaning earlier and earlier, often in the name of independence. And then it is puzzled by the anxiety. The mismatch between the environment your children's nervous systems were designed for and the environment modern culture provides is one of the most significant and most under-examined gaps in contemporary life. Your child's brain was not wired for isolation, age segregation, or structured instruction delivered by a single authority figure. It was wired for a village. The cry you hear before you're fully awake is ancient. The instinct that moves you toward the child is ancient. The need the child has for warmth, for contact, for a web of people who know them and hold them. That is ancient too. It was never supposed to be done alone.